How do you grow a podcast? This is the age old question in podcasting. And today we are going to talk about the 4 ways that you can grow your podcast. And surprise, it's actually way more simple than you think. This is Profitcast, and I'm Seth Silvers.
And I'm the real Brian, and I'm excited for a simple process here because I do feel like growing a podcast has felt very, very, very complicated and very out of reach for most people. So
Yeah.
do enlighten us, Seth. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I want to start off by saying a lot more people are interested in starting a podcast than growing a podcast. And I think there's like some interesting nuances I've seen with this. And just to be clear, I'm not saying like this episode gives you the absolute secret magic pill to grow your podcast.
Yeah.
This is helping us to think about how should we be thinking about growing our podcast. I'm a big framework person where I think if we don't have frameworks to like think through, to like look at things through or interpret things through, then we're just going to think a random million things and it's really hard to be focused. And so for this, we want to share a framework. I call it the podcast growth matrix, but you can call it whatever you want. You can steal it and call it something different. Don't really care. But there's a lot more people that are thinking about how to start a podcast than grow a podcast. I just looked on YouTube just before this. In the last month, there were 49,000 people that searched the term how to start a podcast.
Wow. Still.
And the amount of
Yeah.
still trying to
That's
figure it out.
great. Yeah.
A lot of those were probably businesses and brands trying to figure out how to start a podcast. And the amount of people that searched how to grow a podcast was 260.
Oh, okay. Now
Yeah.
that's why you're not succeeding with your podcast. There you go. Right there. Wow.
Yeah. So 49,000
Wow.
to 260. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that is 0.5%. Loosely.
So what we're saying is that there are people that want to start a podcast for the fun, right? So there's a hobby side of things. I just want to do it. It doesn't matter if I grow it or make any money. There's that. But then there's the other ones that, yeah, it's the bright, shiny object. Let's start a podcast. Let's get into it. Oh, this is going to take work. Oh, this is like a part-time job.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a lot harder than I thought. Oh, yeah, whatever. I'm just going to pod fade.
I think there's a few things that like people just need to understand about podcast growth. One is podcasting is not YouTube. Yes, now you can put podcasting on YouTube. And I'm not saying that like video podcasts aren't podcasts. I'm not saying any of that. I recommend pretty much everybody have their podcasts on YouTube. So not saying don't do YouTube, but the way that podcasts grow is very different. So on YouTube, people have been kind of like, we've been trained over the years to think of content going viral on platforms like YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, or back in the day, maybe the email chain that you received from your aunt with 67 people CC'd in it.
Don't break that chain.
Don't break it.
You're
That's kind of
cursed.
the original viral content is email chains.
Yeah. Or virus content.
And actually, it's funny. I wasn't planning on mentioning the email chain, but that's kind of that's more in line with how podcasts grow, is people sharing it with individual people.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, when they start a podcast, a lot of brands that we've worked with, when they start a podcast, they're expecting to put it out into the world. And then it's like, okay, we cross our fingers and Apple and Spotify and YouTube are going to like show it to the world. The reality is that discoverability sucks in podcasting. Like discoverability is not good in Apple or Spotify. Those platforms are not designed to share tons of trending stuff like YouTube does. Sure, there's charts and top shows and different things, but a viral episode in podcasting is very different than a viral episode on YouTube. So I think that's kind of the first thing that I want people to like realize is when you're thinking about it, podcasts don't really go viral in the same way that we're thinking about YouTube or Instagram.
2 to 3 years ago, everyone's like, hey, put your podcast on YouTube, get it on video. It's a good idea. Now they're saying it's absolutely essential. If you're not on video and on YouTube, you're going to get lost if you're a podcast, right? That's what everybody's saying. If it grows differently, then, and by the way, Kayla, K-Dubs, has always said that YouTube and audio podcasting are completely different platforms with completely different intentions. They cannot be treated as one and the same. So how do you respond to all of those comments right now saying that if you're not on video, you're going to be lost? And then, so everyone's like, oh, great, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. And then what?
I kind of agree with both in a way.
Okay.
The stats show that the primary place that people are discovering new podcasts is YouTube right now.
Okay.
So that's discovery. So that's the number one place that people are learning about new podcasts. There's data, the data on like which platform is the primary one that people are consuming on is a little bit different. It's not as clear. Like YouTube is far and above as far as how they're discovering. It's still like word of mouth and discovering. So there is that aspect of YouTube. However, the thing that we love about YouTube and TikTok and stuff is the algorithm. There's no like viral algorithm on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts.
Hmm.
So that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize is like there is not an algorithm. Like there technically is an algorithm, but it's not designed to make stuff viral. So on those
Yeah.
platforms where like you're looking at building an audio podcast or a podcast that lives on Spotify and Apple, your show is going to grow by initially two different ways. And then we'll break this up to kind of be the 4-part matrix. But a podcast primarily grows by either you telling somebody about it or someone else telling someone about it. At the beginning of this all, your podcast will grow through word of mouth. It is the ultimate word of mouth tool. And when we look at audio podcasts or like podcasts that maybe you have a video, but it's on Spotify, or maybe you have a video and it's on YouTube, long form conversations are not really even optimized for like virality on YouTube. Like YouTube is starting to do more of that. But when you're looking at podcast style content, it is going to grow by either you telling someone about it or somebody else telling somebody about it. Brian,
Hmm.
you've been in podcasting and around it for a long time, so you've probably heard a lot of different thoughts around growth. And before we kind of like break down our 4-part matrix, how have you approached growth with your show, whether it's the Real Brian show or other shows that you've worked on?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think the things have changed a bit. I think in the beginning of podcasting, put the content out there, people are going to find you. And
Yeah.
that was for the most part true. I mean, granted, not always, but and then that started to change, and you had to start kind of getting into, okay, you got to let people know, and it's hard too, because I think with podcasting, once it became commercialized, I think marketers destroy things, right? We talked about that a couple of episodes ago. I think that's kind of what happened, is that podcasting got so big and commercialized that unfortunately it became almost impossible to grow on the platform. And so people were saying, well, the first advice, by the way, was to interview people, and those people that you interviewed would share them with their audience, or would share your podcast with their audience.
Ooh, this is a
Which,
good one.
yeah, and that was something that was perpetuated for many, many years. And we all discovered that just didn't happen. People were busy. They're on 100 podcasts a year or whatever it is. They don't have the kind of capacity to share that with their entire audience. And not to mention, they don't want to bug their audience. That's a lot to actually, if I'm invited on to 50 podcasts and I'm bugging each and every one of you, like, ooh, check out this one and this one and this one and this one, you're going to get a little bit tired of that after a while. So I understand that, but people were relying on that. And so that was the trend of the interview shows. And what's funny is that happened because people thought they could grow. Some people actually wanted to do interviews, but a lot of people didn't. So then the next thing was, okay, become a guest on other people's podcasts, because then you're going to get in front of their audience and then they're going to come to your show, which, yes, that can happen. That has happened for me, but it's not this magic thing where if you go onto somebody else's show, you're automatically going to have, all of their listeners or anything like that. It's not that kind of thing. So
Yep.
there was that. Then there was the piece where you said, Seth, where you're like, you got to go out and you got to share your show. What I learned here was that when I am 100% confident and I'm also excited about what I am podcasting about, I know exactly how to present it, call it the elevator pitch of my podcast. It makes sense. It's clear. It's compelling. And I'm excited and confident. Almost every time the person that I'm talking to will be like, oh, I'm going to go check out your show. What is it? And then I'll like, oh, give me your phone up. And then I give them the link and I just subscribe to that right there. And then, oh, okay, I'll subscribe. And then they listen to it. And then I usually will text them, what did you think? I'd love your feedback. Good or bad, doesn't matter, right? So it's kind of this, you're holding them accountable to actually go and check out your show, which is really good. And then it ends up turning into something, well, then they might share it and so forth. But here's the thing. If I'm not 100% confident and or excited about my elevator pitch about my show or whatever you want to call it, typically I'm not going to share it. I'm a little embarrassed to share what I'm doing right now, or maybe I'll share it, but they're going to be like, huh? And they're a little confused, because I'm not really giving something clear or compelling, which means I need to go back and I need to work on the messaging or the pitch or whatever it is, or maybe even the content itself for the show. So I think this is actually a huge marketing factor and strategy, to be completely honest. If you don't understand and are confident and are excited about your pitch and your messaging, then nothing that you do is going to matter, in my opinion. This is my experience. So that's something I've learned that nobody trained me or told me about. I learned that just totally by accident, the hard way. I don't know why this isn't taught more. And a lot of times the tactics that I was trained to do were a little bit abstract at best. And also it was them essentially trying to get you to do what they did based on their personality, the way their brain thinks, the way that their show is geared and everything like that. And so it's almost like I need to clone them and turn that into my show. I need to fit into their box in order to be able to succeed with the marketing strategies that they gave me, which also obviously that doesn't work either. So those are just a couple of things that I've noticed over the years, which is why I probably haven't been the best at marketing my shows. It's not an excuse. It's more of an observation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you mentioned a lot of really good points, and some of them I'm going to kind of come back to and touch on. Cause a lot of the things you said, like those are things that work. But again, it's like, if we're just doing this shotgun approach, then it's really, really challenging. I've had the opportunity to speak at quite a few podcasting conferences over the last 4 or 5 years. And usually at the beginning of my talks, I will say some version of, just so you know, none of what you're about to learn matters if your content sucks.
Yeah, it's true.
So it's
You can
kind of this
market
thing of
crap,
like,
but it's still crap.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like eventually it will catch up to you. And I think it's the same with this, where if your content sucks, or like you so importantly said, if you're not bought in on it, if you don't believe it, like if I don't actually believe that this show is going to help businesses launch and grow their podcasts, if I don't actually believe that, then it's going to be so hard for me to share it.
Yeah.
Unless I'm like a slime ball, which hopefully I'm not. But
No,
I
you're
think
not.
there's like
You're
got to
not.
be this thank you. I needed that today. I woke up and I was like, I just need Brian.
No, I'm
Tell me
serious. You're
I'm
not though. I mean, really, you're actually a real guy, man. It's amazing. You sit down
Yeah.
and talk. I'm like, dude, this guy's authentic. I love this.
No, I
It's true.
appreciate that. But that's like such an important piece of growing your show, is like, one, you have to believe in it. If you don't believe in it and you're trying to tell other people about it, then they will see right through that.
Yeah.
And especially in the business side of things, if your business and you're launching a show and the only motive is to like get people to turn into customers, people will
Mhm.
sniff that out so fast.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go into the framework, and then we can talk through these 4 things.
Yeah. I love it.
So
Keep going.
this is something that I've seen when we've been working on shows. I did a little doodle while you were talking. I pulled out a piece of paper and
Ooh.
I wrote on it. So
Oh,
I'll
wait.
show the doodle.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's like the whiteboard approach. Okay.
Yeah. It's just this 4-part matrix. And really this goes, there's 4 different ways that a show is going to grow. Either you're going to talk about it, others are going to talk about it, you're going to pay to talk about it. That's the third. Or the fourth is you're going to pay others to talk about it. So you
Mm.
initially have 2 on one side. Here's my little doodle. Sorry for you audio listeners, but you initially have one side where it's, hey, you're telling people about it, others are telling people about it, you're paying to tell people about it, or you're paying others to tell people about it. So let me give some like quick examples. And again, this all comes back to what we said at the beginning of the episode. The main way that podcasts grow is either by you talking or other people talking about it. It's the
Yeah.
ultimate word of mouth tool. It's really similar to those old email chains our parents got from, your aunt with 67 other people selling supplements or something crazy. I don't even know. So if you're talking about your show, this is where it's probably social media. It's probably direct outreach to the people that you know. One thing that is massively underrated in growing a podcast is you texting somebody that you think would like the episode that you just recorded and saying, guess what? I think you'd like the episode we just recorded. Take a listen. I'd love to know what you think. The chances of that person listening are really, really high. And people just don't do that. They just assume that people know about their podcast. So I think we underestimate the importance of like you actually talking about your show. This is where, Brian, you mentioned like the importance of believing in your show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's super important. So I'll stop
Yeah.
there, and I'd love to hear kind of like commentary or thoughts that you have on why do you think more people don't actually tell people about their show?
I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons goes back to what you just said and what I was saying earlier is that they don't believe in it, or they're not confident about what it is, or they're embarrassed about it in some way or another. And maybe they're not like, oh, I'm embarrassed per se, but there is, are you good enough to go up and say, dude, like when somebody says, what are you doing right now? Well, I'm hosting a podcast. Well, what is it and what's it about? And you're just like, oh my gosh, I am so excited about it. You've got to check it out. And like,
Yeah.
we've done this and we've done this, that's going to get somebody to listen. But if you're not doing that, and if you're not genuinely excited about it, then you're probably not going to want to share it with them at all, because you're going to feel kind of stupid, right? And so I think that's probably one of the biggest things right there is people are just not genuinely excited about what they're doing or they're not confident about it. Then the second thing is you've got introverts, and I am not one, but I am surrounded by introverts and I respect introverts very much. But introverts are not necessarily super duper excited about sharing things they're doing. They're private. They just kind of want to keep it behind the scenes and, let it happen. So I think that's a factor. Now that's not for everybody, but I think in general, I see that a lot. Part of the other thing is people just getting out and talking to people and finding the right people. So for example, one of the things that I talk about on the Real Brian show, this is one, is what are you nerding out on? And this is a
Yeah.
phrase that, I started saying it before it was popular. In fact, I didn't even hear it really before I started saying it. This was years ago. And now people are saying, oh yeah, I nerd out or I geek out on this or whatever. But it wasn't a popular phrase when I started saying it. If you'd never heard this phrase, by the way, of course, it's all about what are your passions that you're excited about and you're not apologizing for. That's essentially what it is. But back then, people were like, well, I'm not into nerdy things and I'm not a nerd. Well, it's not about that. They couldn't get past that. And so then I would get discouraged because my messaging was wrong. So then I would say, well, I better not share it with anyone else because
Yeah.
obviously I look like an idiot, So I think I don't know if this is going off of where you're saying, but I think that's part of it. Also coming across as that used car salesman sleazy, like, I don't want to come across as just constantly being that dogmatic promoter of my own thing when I really want to also genuinely care about someone else. So those are some thoughts that I have. There's probably
Yeah.
more in there.
Yeah. This could turn into a whole nother episode. So I'll just say this briefly, but
Yeah.
this is one of the reasons I love podcasting is because it's really hard to hide. It makes like communication authentic. It makes communication kind of public. It assumes that you are going to be like authentic and kind of this unfiltered, less edited, which we talked some about last week.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not good at what you do, or you're not like really stoked about what you do, it's going to be really hard to make it in podcasting. So the result of that
Yeah.
is the people that will succeed in podcasting are the ones that are really passionate about what they do and they're confident enough in it to tell people about it. Which makes it
Yeah.
there's less space for people that are just trying to like use it as a tool. Which one thing we say to our clients is like podcasting, the people that will win are ones that look at podcasting as a craft to be mastered, not a tool to be used.
Mm. Ooh,
And so it's kind of this
it's
difference
true,
of
man.
like, is it a craft or not? I think if we're looking at it as a craft, we're going to be more likely to tell other people about it because we all know that we love oversharing probably with somebody in our life about the dumb things
Hmm.
we're nerding out about or the awesome things we're nerding out about.
This is
So it
this is a really good point though, because for me, when somebody says, well, "What are your passions?" and I say, "Well, podcasting." Like, well, yeah, but what? I'm like, no, really. I mean, I've said this on the show. I wanted to be a morning show host, right? That's what I wanted to do. That was my passion. And so getting behind the microphone, whether it's podcasting or it's a radio, I honestly could care less about the platform as much as it is
Mhm.
about the passion of getting behind the microphone. And so for me, I'm a very proud podcaster because I love the craft and I've done everything I can to master it. Now, for a business or an entrepreneur, that's not their primary focus. I understand that, which is why you should consider hiring somebody who has a passion for the craft to be able to
Yep.
go and do this, or find somebody who says, I'm passionate about what we do as a company and I'm passionate about learning this craft too. I'm going to do both, and I'm going to give it our best. But this goes along with music. I'm a musician as well. And in fact, I've been playing since I was 6 years old and I love it. It is a passion for me. It is something that I have done everything I can to go and continue to master. And if it's like, but everyone's like, oh, you're amazing. And I'm like, dude, I have a lot to learn still. And yeah, okay, maybe I am really good, but the reality is I have a lot to learn. And I think that's like, own what you are good at with the
Mhm.
humility to continue to grow and get better. But because I have such a passion for it, I don't hide the fact that I'm a musician, and I am always like, sure, I'll get up and perform. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do this. Let's go for it, right? But for the musician that is not confident about their craft yet, or well, I haven't done much, then they're gonna bow out. They're gonna constantly step back and not share what they do. So if a company take away the passion of the craft of it, you've got a podcast and you're not excited about what your content is, and you're not sure if it's actually helping or making a difference or impacting, you're going to hide behind it.
Yep. Which means your podcast is not going to work. Again, I
Love
think
this.
this medium makes it hard for people to hide.
Yeah.
So the first piece is you have to tell others. The second piece, which this is the hardest, but also I think the most effective is getting others to talk about your podcast, getting others to share with their people about your show. This one really doesn't happen if your show sucks. Like you can tell people about a crappy thing, but other people are for sure not going to tell their friends and family and recommend something that they know is not good.
So wait, what
So
are some of the reasons that people don't share a podcast besides the fact like if it's just not good enough?
oh, that's a good question.
What are some of the other reasons?
I think it's over general. Like I think it's not
Okay.
it's not like specific enough. Like it kind of just fits into this like nebulous blob of like content because we're shown content all day every day. And so a lot of that we don't remember. So there's a lot of content that we consume as people today that kind of just fits into this like general content that didn't really inspire or change anything about my life.
Yeah.
So I think being over general, people are not going to share it. I use the example all the time with this of a couple years ago when I was like getting really interested in like learning about the basics of cryptocurrency. And there was this episode that Tom Bilyeu did where it was like the basics. It was pretty much basics or like 101 on crypto. So I had spent quite a bit of time. Like I'd listened to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of blogs, all this stuff. By no means was an expert, but I knew enough about it to where I had a hard time explaining it with to somebody without like using all the jargon that I had learned. And so it was way easier for me to send them this episode by Tom Bilyeu that did such a good job of explaining like crypto 101 for people that don't know anything about crypto. I probably shared that episode 20 or 30 people over a year's period.
Wow.
I think that is like the sweet spot of podcasting is when you have a show or a concept that solves a really, really specific problem. I think that's when we get others talking about it. This also gets into like show format and content and editing. And this is why it's really important to continually be looking at the analytics and what we can learn from the data of our show to kind of get these indicators of creating as good of an experience as we can for our audience. And if we create a really good experience and they're listening to a lot of the show, chances are when they come into contact with somebody else that could use this show, they will tell somebody about it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the second piece is we got to get other people talking about the show.
I have a quick example I wanted to share that also goes with this that I think there's an aspect to connection. So obviously there's the content, there's the solving the problem, but then there's a connection. And I'm going to shout out to a YouTube channel that, and this has nothing to do with, it is a business for this guy, by the way, but it has nothing to do with the topic of the show. But it was fascinating because YouTube suggested Trent the Traveler on YouTube. Didn't know who this guy was. And I think it's fast. I like travel stuff, but I'm also a gamer. And it turns out this guy is a van lifer. So he lives in his van. He travels around and shows all this beautiful stuff. He's an outdoorsy guy, but he's a gamer and he has a gaming channel. And I thought, well, that's a cool combination. Like he built out a gaming setup in his van. I'm thinking, okay. Well, and he's very personal. And the way that he does it is he connects with you. And then he connects with you on that vibe level, you know. And so he's big into the whole like cozy feel. He's got the candle and the tea and the, you know, like, oh, I feel like I'm there and I'm just kind of chill and I'm hanging out and I'm having that's a huge thing right there that got me. And honestly, I don't get drawn into most podcasts or channels very much because I'm very multi-passionate. This one drew me in because of the connection that he has built with his audience. It's less about the content and more about the fact that I just like watching him and I like watching how he goes about his day and stuff. And so again, that's I know it's a totally different style and format, but don't discount the connection aspect. And so if you're going to be delivering great content that's niche and it's solving a problem, don't discount the fact that you can really connect with your listeners and your viewers in a way that makes them loyal to you. And that right there, like I'm sharing this guy's channel because of the connection, less about the content, even though, you know, the combination is very cool too.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Trent the Traveler. I hope you're listening or watching.
Yeah, you better be, man, because one of these days we're going to game.
I love it. So the first piece of the podcast growth matrix is you're sharing it. The second piece is other people are sharing it. The third piece is you're paying to share. So those first two, those are the free options. If you're not wanting to pay to promote your show and pay to grow your show, it's either going to be you're sharing it or other people are sharing it. Some people are probably thinking like, well, what about the social media, the platforms and all that stuff? I would say that like even though we've talked about, like, your podcast probably won't go viral on YouTube, I would say that optimizing your content for platforms like YouTube and YouTube showing that to more people, that is a version of like others sharing it. So I think
Hmm.
that's platforms sharing it. Like you want to make sure you're, hitting the right bells and whistles on your show or hitting the right buttons on the back end of these platforms.
Yeah.
Right now, Spotify is really big on like, comments, enabling comments and responding to comments and publishing clips and different things. Like things like that are going to increase the chances that Spotify, which is somebody else, is going to
Hmm.
share your show. The third piece of this is you're paying money to somebody or something or some platform to share your show. This is becoming a lot more popular with like a lot of bigger podcast agencies where direct ads on like Facebook or LinkedIn directing people to either subscribe to your show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This is becoming a lot more popular. And a lot of businesses that are launching shows are spending more on this kind of like direct Facebook or LinkedIn ads to become a subscriber. And so this is where like paid ads on third party platforms would come in, is where you're probably paying an ad that in some way, shape, or form is you talking about your show. Maybe it's a video of you talking about your show. Maybe it's a blog post or like a text post or a picture, but it's probably some version of you are still the one that's asking people to come listen to your show, but you're paying to get that in front of more people. Does that
Yeah.
make sense, Brian?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think be careful too on the paying, because there's I've seen this. In fact, I knew some people that were doing this where they would pay people, and this, it was a legit thing. You would pay somebody to go and listen to your episodes,
Hmm.
and then they would do it, and so it would boost your numbers up. It might even get you featured in, the iTunes top whatever. I say iTunes. Look at this, Apple.
Look at
Oh,
you,
that's
you
an
old man.
old, yeah, getting on the the AOLs and all that. But the Apple top whatever it was, I keep thinking of like iTunes new and noteworthy is like in my head for some reason. Yeah, so they would pay to do that, and so it would rank you. But these people they weren't targeted listeners. They weren't targeted possible people who had some kind of an interest in your show. They were just random people who got paid to listen to things. And a lot of people have used this, by the way, and it's a very popular thing to do, and it grows your numbers, but it doesn't actually add the right listeners or the right viewers or the
Yeah.
right audience. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that, but it totally makes sense of what you're saying. And what I love is that the commonality is share.
Yeah.
Just share. That's it.
Yeah.
Share the show. If you don't share the show, and you've got to be crazy about this. I mean, they used to say you got to share something 7 times before somebody goes, "Oh, you have a podcast?" Yeah, dude, I've shared it with you 7 times. It takes
Yeah.
people 7 times. Now they're saying it's at least 21 times because of how distracted people are. So if you're not consistently sharing without being a pushy jerk, by the way,
Hmm.
then people aren't going to know. And it's going to go over their head the first 20 times.
Yep.
And then even the 21st time they're going to say, "Why should I listen? Why should I
Yeah.
watch? Why should I what's in it for me?" kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
amazing how much it takes to get it in front of people until they actually take action. And so we can't overemphasize the need to share consistently, not just
Yeah.
once, not just twice.
Well, and that's a good point too, because when it comes to paying for promotion, like paying to promote your show to other people, you're going to spend a lot more in ads. You're going to have to pay a lot more money to get listeners to your show. If in the ads, it doesn't look like you really care, or the packaging of your show isn't clear, or
Yeah.
when people listen to the show, then they don't know what it's about. So again, like none of this matters if your show isn't good. It all comes back to that. This is where like I want to mention the third party, like some of the like third party promotional apps, like you're
Yes,
mentioning,
please.
because those definitely, I wonder how many times in an episode we're going to say this is another episode, but like you could go into
Always happens.
we probably should go into detail at some point about like the paid advertising side of this. There are platforms like that's still happening, is some version of like paying platforms that are going to advertise your show to a less targeted audience that are then going to drive either new listens or new follows and then boost you in the charts. The idea behind it is if I spend $5,000 to a less targeted audience, potentially international, maybe it's stateside or, in the country you're in, and those people, even though they're not in my target audience, they hit follow. And then that boosts my show into the top 5 in my category, the top 5 business podcasts for a day or two. The reality is, you will probably get people that see your show in those charts and that actually click through that are in your target audience. That will probably happen. it's really hard to know how many people that happens for. And that's the hard
Mhm.
thing with those with some of those tools is
Yeah.
you just have to go in expecting that retention is going to be really low. I think that where people get in trouble is when they're going in thinking that all of the downloads are authentic.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of like bot driven downloads in any way, shape, or form.
I
But
agree.
I do think there's some advertising platforms where they are getting in front of people. Not everybody agrees with like maybe their methods, maybe they're incorporating ads into games or different things. I just think that people have to know they like and we've done some of this for clients before and we're just super, super clear. And most people don't take us up on it. But there's been times where we're like, hey, this is going to get you in front of this many people, which will boost you on the charts, the very likely. And then being boosted on the charts will probably give you some exposure to some of your actual target audience. But you should expect really, really, really low retention. And some people are like, okay, cool, we want to do that. And it's like, okay, cool, you know the risks involved. You know that we're going to see a lot of downloads come in and then it's going to come down, but your baseline will probably be a little bit higher than what your baseline was before.
Mhm.
So I think like the third party thing, there is opportunities, but it's just tricky. Honestly, I think the industry is growing so fast and maturing so fast that like every my recommendations from a paid advertising standpoint in podcasting are usually very different every 6 months or so. Just because there's new platforms, there's new advertisers, there's new ways, like Facebook might be changing what they're doing, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of gets us into the last piece, which is paying others to talk about your show. So, we have you telling people, we have others telling people, we have you paying to tell others. And then this last piece is you paying somebody else to talk about your show. You mentioned this at the beginning when this is the concept of like going on other shows, which it would go into that first tier, that first quadrant of the matrix of you telling other people. This is where you're paying another podcast host or you're paying other people to advertise your show on their platform. This is still one of the best ways to grow a podcast. This is still one of the best forms of advertising because if I'm going and advertising on Facebook, I don't know if those people are podcast listeners. Now, increasingly, more and more people and a higher percentage are podcast listeners, but those people are not on Facebook to listen to a podcast. If I go and I pay Jordan Harbinger to talk about my podcast on his podcast, those people are literally listening to a podcast right then and there. And
Yeah.
so it's still
That's
the
true.
the crossover is going to be low. Like you're going to be looking in low single digit conversion rate of like out of 100 people, hopefully you get a few to click through to your show, but you're at least getting people that like podcasts talking about your podcast. There are times where if you can like match the right audience. And so I'll actually give an example rather than just sharing what to do with it. We have a client, they have a show that's like pretty involved in like it's like human resources and like management and leadership in businesses. We had an advertising budget. We wanted to advertise, like they mentioned some shows that they wanted us to do. We felt like those shows were a little bit too broad. So we actually went to one of the top podcast networks where all of the shows in their networks are focused around career management and entrepreneurship. We did an ad buy across that network where we paid like 5 or 6 different hosts in that network to initially run ads over like a 2 to 3 week period where at the beginning of their show they were saying, hey, we also think you would like so and so show. So that was really effective because it was the right type of audience. It was like the hosts cared about our podcast because it was related to theirs. Their audience cared about our podcast because it was related to the show they were listening to. And so I think that's where this like fourth quadrant of the growth matrix is where you're actually setting aside budget to go and pay other people to talk about your show. The ideal world is you're dealing with some element of all four of these.
Hmm.
But my hope is that kind of thinking through this like growth matrix and like, hey, anything you do to talk about your show or to grow your show is probably going to land in one of these growth matrix, one of these quadrants. If you're not seeing your show grow, then I would look at those four things and try to ask yourself and think like, huh, are we doing these four things? Are we doing any of these things? Chances are that you're like most podcasters and you're probably creating a show and then sitting back and waiting for it to grow.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people do. But
Hmm.
anyway, so I hope that kind of helps explain kind of this like four piece growth matrix that is how I like to think about podcast growth.
Yeah, it was great. I appreciate it. I was going to say one thing about the paying others to share the show, and I got to thinking about this a little bit. And so let's just say people came to us here on Profitcast and said, hey, we want you guys, we're going to pay you to share our podcast, but I feel like Trent the Traveler did not pay us to share his YouTube channel, by the way. But the reason I shared it, I wish.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, the invoice is on the way, but hopefully the check's in the mail, Trent. Anyway, but the point is that the reason I shared it was because it added value. Now, I also believe in the aspect of connection and building relationships too. And so, for example, if I watch somebody or listen to somebody and I want to build a relationship with that person, and ideally we're seeing them at a conference or something, and that person actually has value and I want to share it, then I'm going to share it. I'm going to share it on Profitcast for free. I'm not going to expect them to pay me to share it because it's going to add value to you. So that's something that, in fact, Wealth of Connection, Vincent I always say his last name wrong, Puglisi. You know Vincent?
No, I've heard his name.
Okay. Anyway, great guy, but he wrote a book called The Wealth of Connection. Is all about building relationships and making connections with people. And so I kind of wonder which is the better way. Is it better to build relationships to where people want to share your stuff because they value you as a human being and what you offer and what you bring to the world? And so them sharing you, there's no monetary exchange. It's all about value, in which case, wouldn't their audience feel more inclined to say, oh, well, I'll go check it out, versus like if it were paid. I see this with review channels.
Yeah.
This video is sponsored by so-and-so because they're paying me to share their product, in which as a viewer, I go, then it's not an authentic review.
Mm-hmm. That is like the perfect way to wrap this episode, is by recognizing that organic sharing is always going to be more effective than paid. So somebody who is so bought into your show that they're sharing it with their audience, that's always going to be more effective when you know that they're not being paid to do that than when they are. It's always going to be more effective when I'm like telling somebody organically, and by effective, I mean like on a 1-to-1 ratio. Like,
Sure.
like technically the most effective thing for me to do is to spend $1 million in Facebook ads. And I like that will be effective from a stance of like, we will get listeners.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like, if I'm speaking to one person, or if Brian, if you're speaking to one person, then it's going to be more effective when it's organic. Paying for growth is a luxury.
Yeah.
So that's where like it's a luxury where it's usually you've tapped out your organic methods, or you've told everybody about it and you want to tell more people about it. But I think you're totally right. Like it's always going to come across better when somebody is talking about your show just out of the goodness of their heart.
So it really needs to be both. Effective. I mean, you need to get the word out, and sometimes getting the word out requires some of that traditional paid advertising and stuff, just because, you've got to meet new people essentially.
It really depends on what you want.
Yeah.
Where it's like, do you want your show to grow into other audiences beyond your own reach and the reach of like your first tier circle? If you do, you're probably going to pay because you don't know this. People. But I think that's such a good point.
And then it goes back to your client, and I won't share any details, but they've got a couple hundred listeners to their podcast, and that's it. And it's generating a multi-million-dollar profit, through some of the stuff they're doing because of it's very highly targeted. And it's very relationship driven, and that's all they need. So I think there is something to be said about, what are your needs? And that goes back to the 1,000 true fans thing, that if you can actually find 1,000 or even a couple hundred very high quality, very specifically targeted audience members that love what you do, you've connected with them, you've built relationships, then that might be all you really need in order to make this very profitable. And so that goes back to just the nature of the business and what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I love it.
Well, I hope this has been helpful. Just kind of, again, thinking through a framework of growth. There's a million things you could do to grow your podcast. All of those things are either going to come down to you talking about your show or getting other people to talk about your show. So I hope this has been helpful. If you guys want more info on this resource of the Growth Matrix, you can find that at the Business Podcast Roadmap. The website for that is just businesspodcastroadmap.com. It is a free resource where we are adding every single month, we're adding new resources to just help you understand how to launch and grow your show. So I encourage you to check that out. We would love to hear from you on it. Brian, any parting words other than to find the podcast on iTunes and Blog Talk Radio?
Yeah, you the AOLs. Make sure to actually go and like find that RSS feed on. Never mind. No, that's great. Blog Talk Radio, man. Now that's That's a blast from the past. I was on there for a very short amount of time. And if you haven't already, do check out some of the other stuff that we're putting out, because we're having these types of episodes, but we are going to be doing recommendation videos. And I'm saying recommendation and not review videos because there's plenty of other people going out there and doing all of those massive comparison, very deep review videos. We're trying to give it to you quick and easy and just here's what you need to get and here's why, and move on, and simple as that. But of course, we'd love to hear from you too. So make sure to actually get in contact with us. So you can comment on the YouTube channel. But either way, the description, all the show notes stuff and everything is wherever it is that you are consuming this show. You can contact us. Our contact information, website, everything's on there for both of our companies. So love to hear from you. But thank you for joining us. And Seth, thank you very much for this. This was fantastic. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We're signing off.